I remember the first day the lake changed its voice. Before the strangers came, the water of Texcoco spoke softly against the chinampas, and canoes hissed along the canals like serpents in reeds. But in the last summer of our city, the water coughed and clattered with wooden bellies that were not canoes at all. Floating houses with wings of cloth and metal mouths that spat smoke. We had watched them build those things in Texcoco, day after day, taking apart houses and beams and dragging the pieces over streets into new canals. When the wind filled their wings and they slid onto our lake like jaguars that had learned to swim, a priest beside me whispered that the gods had tired of our prayers and sent us an answer we did not understand. I was a runner before the siege, a boy with quick legs who carried messages along the causeways and through the markets where chilies burned the air and turquoise flashed in stalls like trapped sky. I knew every bridge and sluice, the place where fresh water from Chapultepec kissed the island through stone pipes, the silent dikes that kept the salty lake from stealing into our canals. When the strangers returned with more men and more allies than locusts in maize, we pulled up our bridges and broke the causeways in teeth-shaped gaps. We thought we could make the water protect us. They brought their floating houses through those gaps, grinding piles and stakes to powder, and the lake that had mothered us opened its arms to our enemies. I remember the day the aqueduct died. The pipes from Chapultepec, cool veins that gave our island sweet water, were cut on the far side. The first time I drank the lake after that, the taste was a slap of salt and mud. Mothers lined up at shallow wells and found only bitterness. We learned to boil brine and let steam kiss copper bowls, to lick the few drops like medicine. I can still feel the grit of that water along my teeth. Every morning, the drums of Huitzilopochtli answered the drums of the strangers. Our drums were deep and steady, a heart. Theirs were many, a storm. They came down the causeways in 3 arms, by Tlacopan, by Tepeyac, by Iztapalapa, carts of thunder at their fronts, men with faces hidden by iron, tall animals with human riders whose hoofs struck sparks from stone. Behind them surged our enemies from the valley, men of Tlaxcala and Texcoco and places I had known only as names, carrying our words twisted in their mouths and our hatred like borrowed knives. They had reasons, I do not deny it. We had taken too much from them when fortune was ours. On the lake, the floating houses chased our canoes and bit them in halves. Obsidian teeth shattered against iron. We learned a new kind of fear, to hear a reed flute and gun thunder in the same breath. Inside the city we turned houses into walls. We pulled down our own temples to fill gaps, cut new canals to feint and trap, raised barricades of timber and stone. Street by street we fought and gave ground and stole it back, like gamblers who have already pawned their sandals but still find one more bead to stake. At night, under lamps that smelled of resin and fat, women boiled what they could catch: water lily roots, dogs, paper mulberry leaves, belts. The market closed. The sacred precinct became a granary of empty baskets. There were no more cacao beans, only stories about their taste. Sometimes I think the gods warned us long before the strangers. A year earlier, when the disease first walked our streets, it moved faster than gossip. Fever took men who could lift boulders, left them leaking from places that never bled before. The dead lay wrapped in woven mats at the ends of alleys, far from the shrines that had filled with whales. We burned new pyres where there had been gardens. Those of us who did not sicken learned the smell of it, sweet and wrong, and held our breath when we ran messages. Our Tilatoni then was Quitlawac, who wore the year's sickness like a cloak and bared his teeth at fate until he fell. Cuauhtémoc took the mantle in a city already gaunt. There is a sound you do not forget. The first time steel bangs the inside of your shield. It rings like a laugh from a god that dislikes you. My Macuahuitl could slice a man from shoulder to ribs if his skin was honest. Against iron it sparked and broke, black teeth leaping away like startled insects. So we learned to grab and pull, to drown the riders' animals in canals, to make bridges of bodies. They learned, too. They leveled streets house by house so their beasts could run, dragged timbers, made new causeways across our moats. The war grew into a carpenter. One day the strangers reached the Templo Mayor again. We had retaken it once with ash on our faces and blood in our throats. The second time we lacked breath. I was on the stairs when our serpent banners came down and a square of colored cloth with a cross rose where our god's hummingbird had watched. The wind caught it and snapped it flat. For a heartbeat the whole city went quiet, as if everyone inhaled at once and refused to let the breath go. The brigantines patrolled our canals until even dreams had oars. They cut our canoes with iron beaks, chased boys who had only ever raced each other for laughter. The water took everything. Voices, faces, broken planks, blood. When a man fell in, he did not splash. He disappeared, swallowed by silt and hair and reeds and the ink-black pull of deeper places. We piled bodies as walls. We burned perfume in cracked bowls to tell ourselves we were still people. I remember Cuauhtémoc's eyes, not from near but from a distance, the way we all watched him when he walked along the platforms. He was young like me, but his gaze made you stand straighter. He spoke few words, he carried a bow. When he passed, men who had eaten nothing that day tightened their belts and smiled with their mouths closed, to keep the last taste inside. The strangers grew crueler as the city shrank. They cut causeways behind us, widened gaps into gulfs, burned houses until the wind itself stank of char. They learned to take captives not for sacrifice but for questions. I will not put those questions into words. We learned to be silent as clay. The last morning had a light like copper. Not gold, not fire, but the tired metal of coins handled too long. We gathered in the quarter that still floated above the wreckage. Families clustered behind the men. No banners, no drums, only a single shell trumpet that sounded like a throat drying out. When the strangers came on, it was without hurry. They did not need to hurry. The lake under us had turned to mirror their will. We fought until our hands could no longer open and close. I saw a boy try to bite an iron blade and break his teeth. By noon, there was no line, only knots of men in water and rubble. I climbed a half-fallen wall to see for messages, and all I saw was the city returned to islands. The sacred precinct a square of fire, the market a black tooth, the causeway's thin scars trampled by ants. Our Tenochtitlan was taken on the water, in a canoe that had once carried him like a throne. He asked the stranger with the beard to end it with dignity. The wind carried only the answer's shape, which had the outline of refusal. We lived, some of us, enough to walk later through streets that had been cut into channels, to pass places where we had been named and find only ash, to help carry stones from our own temples to build a new house for a new god whose stories grew teeth in our language. I learned to make a different kind of gold leaf for altars that replaced the ones I had known. I pressed it to wood with breath held, the way my father taught me, and the gold stuck as faithfully as ever. That surprised me. It should not have. I am older than I expected to be. On certain days, when the lake is quiet and a heron lifts as if pulled by a string, I can hear the voice it had before the floating houses. It sounds like reed flutes from a far feast. I have grandchildren who ask me if the strangers came from the east like the sun or from under the lake like spirits. I tell them they came the way all fate comes. Along roads we ourselves had paved, across water we ourselves had disciplined, in the mouths of men whose names we already knew. And I tell them this, our city fell, yes, but it did not vanish. It lives in the way the Chinampas still breathe in green, in the salt smell that arrives with certain winds, in the words we use that have thorns the strangers' tongues still find. If I close my eyes, I can run the causeway again. I can feel the gaps under my feet, the pulled-up bridges, the places where we left decoy planks for beasts to stumble. I can taste brine. I can hear the drum that started as a heart and ended as a promise. The gods we fed are quieter now, but the lake remembers. And when the evening sun lies flat as obsidian on the water and the heron stands on one leg like a priest, there is a silver line beyond the reeds where, just for a breath, you can see the hull of a floating house slide by, and the water shrug it away. That is how I know we are not finished.